Hey everybody, Mr. Grove here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Kingdom Protista. And so we've covered two kingdoms already, the Kingdom Bacteria and the Kingdom Archaea, and now we're on our third one. And so protists are going to be kind of the junk drawer of the kingdoms, and they just, just like your junk drawer at home would have all kinds of different things in it, batteries, tape measure, tape, scissors, you name it. The Kingdom Protista is kind of like that, and so if we have something that doesn't quite qualify as a plant, and it's just not exactly like a fungus or an animal, where do we put it? Well, we're going to put it in that Kingdom Protista. And so the first thing we need to make sure we're good on is that they are eukaryotes. So unlike bacteria and archaea, they do have nucleus, they have other organelles, and so just like the other plant, fungus, and animal kingdoms, they're all going to be eukaryotic. Also usually unicellular, but there can be some multicellular components. So something like kelp, is very large, 50, 60, 70 feet, and that would obviously be very multicellular. But a lot of them are unicellular. We can have heterotrophic protists, or we can have autotrophic protists. And so heterotrophic, they got to get their food from somewhere. And so sometimes that's going to be an indicator that these are bad guy protists because they're trying to be parasitic against us or other hosts. But then we have other autotrophic protists like algae that can make their own food through photosynthesis, and they don't need to be a parasite to us. Reproduction can be asexual or sexual, and some organisms can do both. So in the case of some things where one cell will be able to just form two new cells, so like an amoeba, we would have asexual reproduction. But then some things can do sexual reproduction. And then some things like a slime mold can have both possibilities depending on what the conditions are. So the variety of things in the Protist kingdom is very big, but the one thing they definitely have in common is they have to be around water. So whether they're living in water or living in a watery host organism or living in a damp, cool place, there has to be water present. So if we talk about different kinds of protist groups, so a protozoan is going to be a protist that's kind of animal-like. So kind of that whole zoology, zoo, has to do with animals in the word. And then if we have plant-like protists, we're going to call those algae. And so we'll see later on that those are going to be dependent on color. We kind of group them according to their color: green algae, red algae, brown, and yellow. And then fungus-like protists are going to be ones that act like a fungus. So these are going to be our slime molds and water molds. Just like molds are in the fungus kingdom, these slime molds and water molds are fungus-like in the protist kingdom. So let's take a look at our first specific protist. And so this is the Archaeozoans. And so that's our large group. Another smaller group name would be the Diplomenods, and then the specific name would be Giardia lamblia. So it'd be kind of like, this is a GHS student, this would be a freshman GHS student, and then this would be our very specific student, John Smith. And so Giardia is an intestinal parasite protist, and here's kind of the thing: it lacks a mitochondria. So with no mitochondria, that's going to make it a parasite. It doesn't have the ability to get its own energy source, and so it has to get that energy from a host. Another interesting kind of physiological, we have flagella that will help it move, but then also these two things are not eyes, those are nuclei, so it's got a double nucleus in that. And so that's kind of characteristic of what Giardia would look like. We kind of nickname that backpacker's diarrhea, the giardiasis, or the disease. And so where Giardia comes from is contaminated water. So it's important not to drink poopy water. And you might think, well, that's good because I don't do that. But it's very easy to, if you have well water, if there's livestock close by, that could contaminate the well. Or if there is a stream, you're hiking hiking in the mountains somewhere, and there's a stream that looks clear to you, but you don't see Mr. Elk, and his friends that are kind of pooping in the water on the other side of the hill, and so that can contaminate that. And so that's why we often call this backpacker's diarrhea. And so I had to put a picture of my wife here because she has done several stints on the Appalachian Trail. And on one of them, she came back and she had the diarrhea. And so I said, well, you might have Giardia. No. And so after 2 or 3 trips to the bathroom, she was like, yeah, I might have Giardia. And so we traced it back, and there was one time that they had put their iodine tablets in their water, but they had just kind of mistakenly rushed through it and did not let the iodine set the full time allotment that it needed to be safe to drink, and they accidentally drank it too soon, and that one time was enough. Now, for those of you concerned, my wife's just fine. You go to the doctor, you get some medicine, and it does kill the protist, and then you just pass that through your intestinal tract, and everything's good to go. So, but if you were isolated, alone, out in the outback somewhere, dehydration can be a very serious thing. And so that vomiting and diarrhea that could be caused by the parasite could lead to more serious conditions. So that first one is our Archaeozoan diplomads, and specifically Giardia lamblia. So another protist that we'll talk about is the Euglena. So here's our Euglena on the big family tree. And so they are kind of an oval pear shape. They've got a flagella. They also kind of have an eye spot. So the eye spot can't look at you and say, oh, hey, there you are. It just sees, wow, something big really blocked a lot of light. Maybe I should swim the other way. These guys are photosynthetic. And so that means that they don't need our food. They don't need to parasite us because they make their own food. And so these are freshwater. They're going to be in common freshwater bodies. If you've got local lakes or rivers, chances are they would have Euglena. They're going to go in, they would come out, and they would not be any in parasitic harm to you, the host. The good thing would be they would be part of the food chain. And so that would allow them to play a factor in that, and ultimately that food chain works its way up to us. So these are good guy protists, and they are ones that are good for us to have around. One more negative one that we'll talk about in this segment, and this is the Kinetoplastics. So Kinetoplastics are protists that have just a little tiny extra piece of DNA that's outside of the nucleus, and so that's called the kinetoplast. And so specifically, 2 different types of kinetoplasts would be Trypan, Sonoma, and Chagas. And so the Trypan Sonoma parasite is kind of this little worm-like guy, and you can see compared to a red blood cell the size that he would be. And so both of these protists are carried by a double host system. So in the case of Trypan Sonoma, they are carried by the tsetse fly, and the tsetse fly then is about the size of a housefly, maybe a tiny bit larger, very aggressive, biting fly, and so they will suck blood from their host. So if they bite somebody with African sleeping sickness and then bite somebody healthy, they can transfer that parasite, the Trypan Sonoma, to the healthy person. And so that's the tsetse fly. What it does is it attacks the red blood cells, and if you don't have enough red blood cells, you're not carrying enough oxygen, you don't have oxygen to run your mitochondria, and you aren't making ATP for energy. And so a person will slowly get sicker and sicker until they slip into a coma, and untreated, it's pretty much 100% fatal. But the treatment is out there, and so if you are in a position where you can get the treatment, you are pretty much 100% survivable. But still, there's anywhere from about 10,000 to 50,000 people that die a year because of African sleeping sickness and Trypan Sonoma. So that's one. The other is Chagas. And so the Chagas is carried by these guys, and they are known as the kissing bug or the blood-sucking beetle. And sadly, we call them the kissing bug because what happens is in third world countries, they will crawl up on people who might be sleeping closer to the ground because of poverty, and they need to find a place to bite, to suck blood from. Well, they're not going to want to bite through tough skin, but your lips are nice and soft and moist, and so those are easy to bite through, and so they will bite there. and then it's actually the feces of the bug that contain the Chagas protist. And so then that protist then gets in the person. And sadly, this one does not show up right away. And so it shows up later on down, and what the Chagas protist attacks is your heart tissue. And so someone who has Chagas, it might go undetected for quite a while until then later it would show up as some form of heart disease, and maybe even too late in the form of a heart attack. So that is Chagas. This is a real problem in Central America, and kind of starting to show some cases in the southern United States, so like or along the Texas, Arizona, New Mexico border then. But both of these would be definitely bad guy protists that are members of the Kinetoplastid group. So I hope that was helpful, and smash that like button, and we'll continue on later.